Welcome everyone to the Builder Space B for today's sessions. And hopefully you enjoyed the party yesterday and now we are ready to listen to some interesting talks. And first of them is going to be by Emiliano. Did I get it right?
Amazing,
yeah, perfect. And we'll be talking about how to use foreign assets in the Asset Hub system chain. So stage is yours. Thank you.
Thanks. So welcome everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you basically what we have learned with the team regarding foreign assets. It's a lot of content to be covered, so I do expect that this ends up being a useful resource to the future. These notes will be available, so I would like you to try to follow up the general concepts, and maybe then we later can speak up about details, and this will be available because, again, tons and tons of concept. Today, what we're going to do is describe, register, teleport, and reserve asset transfer foreign assets from Trappist, right? This is me. Happy to see that I do know a lot of people here, and that is super great. Thank you for joining. And the index of today is basically touching on some basic concepts that we need to cover to stuff kind of to make sense. Then speak about Asset Hub foreign assets, and then we are going to do a registration, teleport, and reserve transfer of these foreign assets. Some were map resources. Again, please do come back at those at some point. Are many talks, one from Hector, another from Steve, a couple of deep dives from delivery services, which is the department that I am from, and the docs that are really, really helpful to kind of understand and get to a point which I assume or kind of assume that we all already have. So basic concepts, let's start with assets, because I know everybody knows what an asset is, but still it's relevant to put it in our context. And I would like to call it like a token owned by someone, or it's representative or it's representative on a certain system. This can get as complex as we want to, but let's just talk about and refer to it as something that we can own, and it can have some value, intrinsic value on that. And there are some basic stuff that we would like to do with it, like it's creating it or mint it, and then transfer it from one account or one entity to another. Again, I will be using pretty flexible wording, otherwise this can be getting extremely, extremely complex. So in the context, it could be fungible, it could be not fungible. I think we're already kind of familiar with that. And substrate frames palette asset is what mostly everybody uses for managing this kind of entity and asset. How does it look on chain? Basically, we have on top, the 1, 2, 3, it's the ID that is a mapping that says like, okay, there is an asset that is stored on this ID. I can access to it through that basically number or way to key to recognize it. And it has some relevant information inside, like some relevant roles, the deposit, the minimum balance, which is basically the minimum amount that an account needs to have to actually exist. And if it's sufficient, like it used to be related to paying fees, but that concept is going to be evolving, and now it's more relevant, like if we need a deposit of another mostly used token that assures me that I committed to be able to create that asset. Again, not getting fully into the assets themselves, because I assume that this has been already at least have a grasp on. Native asset, it's relevant to us because it's an asset that is heavily linked and bonded with certain chain, and it's normally the ones that we use for super relevant use cases like paying fees and governance. XCM has been named many times in this conference, but messaging format and languages. And what I want just to take from this is that it's this amazing language and messaging format that we can use for cross-chain application. And basically, through Palette XCM is what we currently, or at least a really nice way to expose these instructions for being used. So, on the underlying side, we have the horizontal channels and the XCMP, but again, trying to cover some ground because I want to get to the juice and meat of this part, which is actually transferring those foreign assets themselves. But we do need to have one more step before moving forward, which is basically the concept of multi-location. And how I like to see it is with this kind of drawings, yes, which basically what they do is represent the thing like, For me, if I am a consensus system and I do have to identify something within myself, it's kind of easy. I can just put a tag on that, and it's like, oh yeah, this is Bob, this is my Bob, this is my parachain, me being a parachain, for example, Bob. But what about if we are going in a cross-chain universe and we need to start identifying Bobs all over the space, right? Multi-location does come handy regarding to that, because it's basically a way to pointing out at some entity or account or whatsoever that is in another space. How does it work? I just like to fill them and relate them to how the folder system works, in which you can go up levels and go down levels, yes? And in this case, we have Bob here, which is an account. And for Parachain, it is inside Parachain B. So for Parachain B, Bob is basically not need to go in up, which is parent 0, and interior x1 account Bob, which is like, okay, I go one level down, me being the parachain, inside of me, there's Bob. But then I have Parachain A, which is that I use interesting case that to get to point at Bob, it needs to go one level up, then one level down, and then another level down. That is why basically you have parent 1, and then you have interior x2 para B, which is like parent 1 gets me into the relay chain, x2, one down para B, another one, account Bob. Again, I am assuming that this is kind of already covered, so going super fast. And yes, what happens with the assets that we previously mentioned, right? These tokens that have some value or not. It could be, just a representation that could be minted and transferred. And we merge it up with the concept of multi-location, and now we can have assets that are reachable, and and that we are able to point at from any part of the space, yes? From this cross-chain application space. Basically, what those multi-assets are is basically you take what an asset already is, and instead of using that simple key just to say, okay, number 1, 2, 3 is my asset here in my system, I can add a multi-location, so I can point at assets in another spaces or consensus systems. Which leads to an interesting concept, which is the derivative asset, is that on one consensus system, this also applies in finance environments. You can find never-ending amount of definitions, but I think that the most interesting one is the one in which we say, like, okay, we have an asset, and then we have a derivative of that asset on another system, and their value is linked. It's just like that. It's some kind of representation on another system of a token in a system. Cool. And I will start using the word chains, parachain system. It's like they do the trick. Sovereign account. What is a sovereign account? Well, basically, it's on one consensus system, I can have an account that is being owned by another consensus system. And if we're talking about parachains, let's speak about one parachain that has on it an account that basically is owned by another parachain, right? I like to see them as some kind of embassy, if that concept works, because it kind of makes sense. How do I get them? There is a way to calculate them, depending if you are talking about a parent chain or a sibling chain, and there is a super interesting tool that we can access through that link there. Again, assuming that you will go back to this at some point in the future. Okay, recap. We have multi-location, multi-assets, and basically what we are referring to at this point, which is the cross-chain space, which is the interesting part. We have the assets, and we have ways to identify assets all over this cross-chain space. So how do we transfer them? There are two ways to do so, and this is the boring version of it. So I will go to the fun version of it, which is basically an asset teleport. What does an asset teleport do? Is like I open up a communication with another system. We trust each other in a way in which, as we know the nature of XCM, I cannot tell from para A, I tell him, hey, I just burned this token, trust me, I did it. And then the para B is like, okay, then I will just mint them. It's like a wizard that mints and creates tokens, right? But the thing is, like, there is a level of trust in which, like, how do you make sure that there is no balances being totally messed up there? Well, basically, they need to trust each other, and they need to open up a direct channel each other. But that might not be the use case for everybody, because I maybe not be wanting to trust everybody. I don't know if that's healthy, right? So we do have another way of transferring asset, which is the reserve asset transfer, in which para A trusts a reserve, right? And para B trusts a reserve. And basically, the reserve what does is has an account, sovereign account of these two parachains, and let's keep it into the parachains domain. And when it has some balance on the sovereign accounts of that parachain, it allows the parachain to mint a derivative token that is called a token, and I don't expect you to see that small a from there, but makes sense. And it's like, okay, on your sovereign account, me as a reserve, I'm letting you print or mint actually receipts. Receipts that prove, which are the derivative tokens, that on the sovereign account on my chain, which I am the reserve, you have this amount of tokens. How does the reserve asset transfer work? Basically, Parachain says, okay, these are my receipts, I'm bringing them, I'm burning them. So move the funds, please, from this, my sovereign account in you, which is the reserve, to this other parachain reserve. Then this little guy is like, hand this, and there is the sovereign account. The tokens are dropped, and like it notifies, the reserve notifies the other parachain, hey, your balance on the sovereign account has been incremented. You are now able to mint derivatives on your chain of that token. Interesting part about that is that at the end of the day, yes, we have the same balance that kind of moved from one way to another, but they didn't have to speak to each other. They only need to trust the reserve. This is the way it looks at the instruction level on the executor. And this comes to the next question, is like, as a parachain, which reserve should I use, right? And again, how could my native asset, which is something that I find extremely useful. Remember, a native asset is an asset that is extremely bonded with my intrinsic value proposition, so normally. So it would be good if I could expand through these methods, like reserve asset transfer, my asset, which at some point represents or could represent what I'm proposing to the system, into other actors of the ecosystem. And there where asset hub and foreign asset comes from, at least a part, because it is a super interesting system parachain that covers a lot of ground. But this is the case that, for us at least, is most relevant for today. So what this asset hub is basically a system parachain that specializes on managing assets. It has some really nice properties like lower deposit and lower fees, which make it ideal, and since it's a system parachain itself, to be seen as the reserve and the way to go and the place to go when you want to get interactions and anything related to assets, and therefore the name. Of course, this could be way more expanded, but as I told you, the whole purpose of this is trying to get into the how you do this stuff part of the presentation. There is this concept of foreign assets, and foreign assets are, from the perspective of asset hub, assets that were created on another chain. And we can get them, the hard text there, or we can do the representation that is like para A, which is ID or para ID 100, says like, hey, this is my native token. Would you mind registering in the asset hub? Because it will be useful, for example, if I want to, if I want you to be the reserve of my native asset and I want to get my token reserve asset transfer to the rest of the ecosystem. Asset hub will tell him, okay, you need to do a deposit. Again, this is like something that comes from the nature of assets themselves. But I will register it, but under my perspective of how do I see it. And again, how do I see it means to the multi-location. This is why I try to represent here, and I don't know if you see it right or not, but basically for a parachain, its native asset, native token, is basically the multi-location 0 here, which is me. And it represents this, and it asks it to register as a foreign asset, because it basically wasn't created on Asset Hub, it was created on a parachain. And it asks Asset Hub to register it, and like Asset Hub will say, okay, but let's register it as you from my perspective. So since they are sibling chains, this looks like something like parent 1 x1 parachain 100. I hope this will start making sense as we move forward. How is this implementation of foreign assets? I think it was a really interesting case of seeing two versions of the same palette doing different stuff in the same runtime. Super interesting to see. Basically, it's a palette assets, but in the top, you might see that it says instance 2. You have a trusted assets, which are the ones that are generated and created on the asset hub itself, which is a regular palette asset. But then inside the same runtime, you have another palette asset instance that has a different configuration, right? And allows you to design a specific logic for those kind of assets and kind of separate what a trusted or asset hub created asset is, and a foreign asset, which is basically an asset that is registered by a sibling parachain. Cool. One example of these many is like on the creator region, you see that the foreign creators must be a sibling parachain. That kind of stuff is super interesting and super useful, that you can have like your own logic dedicated to managing these kind of assets, what they can do and what they shouldn't be doing, which is the super interesting part. Again, you end up being super exposed as a hub of anything. So it's nice to have this amount of control or possibilities. How do they look on chain? Basically, remember that at the first slide, and I will not push all the many times the arrow back again, but basically it looks exactly like an asset, but the only big, huge difference is that instead of having a straight up ID there, like with a int, is like a multi-location, right? Which is the multi-location in this case? We will be seeing the asset on chain of the foreign asset on chain of the Parachain 1836, which is Trappist in this context. So with the usage of asset hubs, foreign assets, and XCM, we can explore further integration and development of multi-chain applications. And to be honest, I find this to be the most interesting part. Is like, you come in there, you register your asset, and now your asset could have different versions all over the space, and the potential of that, for me, was mind-blowing. Now into the title of the workshop, or the call, is how to use them, right? For that, no need to scan that, but it's basically we're going to use Trappist, right? And Trappist is a system parachain that is the on Rococo, yeah. That is basically maintained by our beloved team of delivery services. And what we do is basically we implement the stuff in there just to generate kind of these use cases and understand how things could be done and propose the ecosystem ways of doing it. So yeah, we have Trappist in there. We are going to use that as our main parachain to interact with Asset Hub. And then we also have Stout, which Stout is another runtime running inside of the same project that we have for having an extra, basically, runtime. Sorry, parachain for demos and stuff. But basically, it does mimic most of what Trappist does. What are we going to do today? And we are actually pretty okay on time, which is amazing. We are going to register the foreign asset, right? And set the metadata for it. I know there is stuff that I might have not mentioned when I presented the concept, but I will slowly go back into it and go over it again. We're going to do a teleport of hub inside Asset Hub and from Asset Hub back to Trappist. And then we're going to do a reserve asset transfer of hub into Stout, this new or this third parachain in context. How is the topology? It's like blessed be Somminet, because we are going to do everything on a local test environment using Somminet and Polkadot.js, and this is how it basically looks. And we can start now with the demos themselves. I will stop at some point, like for a quick, for a quick recap. But I would like to, start covering the ground of the demos themselves before doing so. What to do to register a foreign asset from a parachain into the Asset Hub? A lot of stuff. But I do not intend you to read that and say like, I am understanding what is happening there. It's just, mostly a lot of you already do. So, but I will cover one of those steps, like step by step, what we need to do. First of all, in Asset Hub, interacting with the palette foreign asset, again, it's another instance of a palette asset, we need to create or arm the create call. The create call is the call that will create the asset itself on this instance of palette assets. We are going to set the ID as basically my I am trying to register hop, which is not Trappist native asset. So I will register, again, using this convention that we spoke about, that the location of the native asset is me. As Trappist, I will register hop as my location from Asset Hub perspective, right? Using, again, multi-location. Who is going to be the admin? It makes all the sense that is the sovereign account, which is the account that is being regulated and controlled under the governance body, of my chain. And then we have the minimum balance, minimum amount of hop that the account needs to hold to actually exist, otherwise it will be erased. The 12 decimals, it's not actually set here, but it's just for you to understand that you don't need 33 millions of hops for your account to exist. This will actually be read as 12 decimals in the future. How does it look? Are you going to play along? Now it works. Polkadot.js, I am on Asset Hub. I go into the foreign asset, create, right? Create call, set the multi-location of Trappist, because this is the one, the asset ID, basically, and this is the location, multi-location that will be used to identify hop as a foreign asset on Asset Hub. And this in this part, I did mess it up a little bit, but I left it because now you will see me going to look for the sovereign account address from the other tool, copy and paste it back, and this is super cool. Polkadot.js lets you know, oh, so this is the sibling account of this number, right? And that's the minimum balance, and then I get the encoded call data, right? Which is like, okay, the call to be ready to be sent from Trappist, right? To be executed on Asset Hub, and this is the part when the riddle starter gets super interesting. But basically, I am going to use Polkadot.xcm, which is basically palette.xcm, to expose the send option in which I'm going to arm an XCM message to be executed on Asset Hub executor, but it's going to be sent from Trappist. And basically what I'm asking is like, hey, Asset Hub executor, please do these instructions. Execute these instructions on your XCM executor. What is going to ask? Basically to withdraw rock by execution. And since it's coming from sudo, this is going to be interpreted as the sovereign account of Trappist already. Then transact, which basically is execute on destination, please, the call that I'm sending you. And then I am sending you the encoded data that I created previously. And then basically after you have done everything, please give me back my change and refund it to my sovereign account. That basically is the message. This is how it looks. Yes. This is how the call looks with sudo. This is being done from Trappist, sending to Asset Hub, which is 1000 per ID. I didn't mention that, sorry for that. Basically do all the instructions that I previously said. That is kind of the long story short version. But what is relevant, this is the amount of rock that I'm being requested to be withdrawn, where I'm going to buy the execution with. And basically, this is the data of the create call that I'm going to ask the executor to ask the chain to execute there. Like, yeah, madness. But the thing is, like, it is what I just explained happening there. I did highlight because basically this is where I'm refunding the funds, and it's back to the sovereign accounts, which is where the funds will be withdrawn off. Of course, there's also involved here the existential deposit, so we do need to previously fund our sovereign account with a little bit of rock, enough to cover the existential deposit of the asset creation. And one cool stuff of Asset Hub is that it has lower ones, so it's actually, yeah, better for that than, for example, the release chain, which is something that used to be done. On success, we can go to Asset Hub, and we will see the event for an asset created, and you don't know how happy I was the first time that I saw that event being emitted, because it meant like, yeah, it is happening. We will repeat the same process, and I will not invest any more time or too much time into this, into setting the metadata, which it's basically metadata associated with our asset. I will just do it there. I don't know if maybe some of you will know if there is actually a convention of how to name the assets, but I just named it like Trappist hop, and it's called hop. And yeah, the one relevant part is like the 12 decimals part for like any UI to interpret the amount of numbers that I have given as stuff, like which ones do correspond to a decimal. I create that call. I get, again, the encoded version of it. I go back to Trappist, and again, with the palette XCM with sudo, I do a send. Exactly the same process. It's like, first of all, from Trappist, I ask like, hey, in your time, this call, which means create an asset, please do it. Fire. Then I do the same process with the metadata, fire. There is only one thing that is interesting to highlight here, is that previously to the asset creation, the origin of the execution of this transact must be XCM, because since the asset is not currently created, it will recognize the sovereign account as the owner. But once that we have already created the asset, we can set, and we must set, as the one firing the transact operation on Asset Hub as the sovereign account, because it's the owner of the asset, and I'm basically setting an updated metadata of that asset, which I am the owner of. Yeah, again, this is how it looks. This is the encoded call data that is being sent to be executed on Asset Hub. And we fire that. Fire is send it. I think both of them work. The blessed 12 seconds. Yeah. And then we go into the Asset Hub, and we get the foreign asset metadata set, and it says like Trappist hop, and so. What did we do? Basically this. We funded, I didn't show that because it's a simple fund. It's like a straight out send rocks from any account that has funds on Rococo to the sovereign account. Then arm the create call on Asset Hub. Then with that call that you have armed, go into Trappist, wrap it up in a transact, send it out, fire away, get the confirmation. Now you have your asset created. Arm the set metadata on Asset Hub, get that back to Trappist, wrap it up, fire away, get the confirmation, done. Your asset is registered now on Asset Hub. Cool. I will stop in a similar diagram, but after covering this one, like for 3 minutes, if somebody wants to, I don't know, ask anything, or otherwise, of course, I will be around, because I know this is like a lot of, it's like some kind of riddle, but it makes sense at some point. So we are going to do the teleport, okay? And to do so, we need to do a lot of stuff. But let's start with checking out that the configuration of XCM in Trappist, or in any parachain that actually, again, when I mean to Trappist, it's any parachain that wants to do this kind of interactions, is okay. And there are two relevant things that we need to check. First one is the XCM filter, which basically must allow us to teleport basically our native asset outside of ourselves. It's common to see, at least I've seen in the ecosystem, that it's being used like an everything, like no filter applied, but we didn't try to add a filter to allow only native asset to be teleported out, just to, I don't know, cover users to do not doing unnecessary stuff, or I don't know. It was like an X experience. But currently, how we do have it set up, basically you can only teleport hops out of a Trappist and not any other asset that you might create there. And then we need the trusted teleporter. In this case, you can see that basically I'm checking that, or setting that the Asset Hub is a trusted teleporter, meaning like I will allow teleports in from Asset Hub. Once we have this configured, now there is a sequence of steps that might make no sense to you, but I hope they make sense once I finish it up and try to explain. The first thing that we are going to do is we are going to create on Trappist. I'm assuming that we are going to on a state 0 thingy, that nothing has been done yet, asset related. And we need to create on our parachain on Trappist an asset, right? Which is going to be used as the derivative of rock. And then we want to use asset registry to map it out to a multi-location. This is what it looks like. Basically what I'm doing is like on Trappist, I am going to the simple, straight out asset creation. I create an asset, and then I will say, okay, this asset, that in this case, it's going to be rock, and asset ID 1. Then I will go into asset registry, which is a palette that maps out my ID to a multi-location. And I'm going to say, OK, basically, rock in this cross-chain system is basically one level above me. And you will see it here. This is how we identify it. Again, Asset Hub doesn't have its own token. It relies on the relay chain token. So yeah, that is basically the currency that is used for many purposes. That is why also we're creating that. What I just did there is basically asset registry means that I said, OK, I created this asset, and I map it out its location to basically the rock location, dot location, relay token location. Why is that? Because now we are going to do a reserve asset transfer from Asset Hub into the Parachain, into the account of Trappist that wants to do the teleport of Hop. I know, this might not make sense. Like, why are you reserve transferring rocks to an account in Trappist when you want to, what you actually want to do is teleport Hops into Asset Hub? Well, let me get there. This is how a reserve asset transfer looks. Plain and simple, I'm just reserve asset transferring rocks from Asset Hub into Trappist. I am using a plain old simple reserve asset transfer call from palette.xcm by default, just the correct setup, like send it to an account in Trappist. And so I'm not focusing in this because this is something that has been covered multiple times. Once that we have this reserve asset transfer done, we will see a confirmation event on Trappist, right? That says that the asset has arrived and it has been issued. Cool. And this is the interesting part. And let's pause for a second here. I am an account of Trappist, on Trappist. I want to teleport Hops into Asset Hub. But for some reason, Emiliano told me that reserve asset transfer rocks should be sent to me. So now I'm the same account, and I have the Hops and derivatives of rocks on me. This allows us to do a withdraw and teleport function, which is a call that we built as an extension of palette.xcm, which allows us to teleport Hops but pay execution on Asset Hub with rocks. Why is it done? Because it makes sense that Asset Hub doesn't allow rocks in to be teleported, so we couldn't just teleport them in, right? And at the moment, which is being currently worked on, you cannot pay execution with native assets of our chains. So like we would be having the situation in which we will be asking the executor of Asset Hub to do something and not being able to pay for that something, right? So basically it won't happen. But now that we have the derivative, and now that we have the Hop, we have the derivative rock, D-rock, I will call it because derivative is so long. I have D-rock and I have Hop on me. I will do this call, send it, and with that, I will burn the amount of D-rock that will be used to pay execution on Asset Hub with those rock, and then do a straightforward teleport of Hop. Basically, what this call does is not ready for production because it's something that we are still developing. The destination is the Parachain 1000. The beneficiary is any address from Asset Hub that you want to send stuff in there, the assets in there. Then the native asset amount that you want to send, and basically the fee asset, which is the interesting concept, is like which with asset do you want to pay execution on destination. Now it's rock because it's this Asset Hub case, but this could be expanded to any use case in which you are just telling, like, I want to pay execution on destination without any other asset that is not being teleported. So, yeah, warning signs and everything. Withdraw and teleport is used to teleport only native assets with the purpose of buying execution on destination with a non-teleported asset. Palette withdraw and teleport it's highly dependent, so it extends palette.xcm. It's not production ready, and the sender account on origin must have derivative assets of the fee asset on the origin chain that they could have received by a reserve asset transfer. Why are we doing this? And I'm thinking that I'm okay with the time. Is basically if you do not ask the account on origin to have these derivatives, this could be a problem of double spend in which they just, like, it gets submitted, like, prove me that you have on destination the enough amount of tokens to buy this execution. And like these receipts that are derivative tokens, that like does this job amazingly well. So this is how it looks. At the end of the day, it does look like just another call. It is interesting. Now you see this has been merged to Trappist about 5 to 6 days ago. So if you go in there, you will see a really interesting PR, which has around 70 comments. Yeah, it has been merged, which is interesting to see if you want to follow up this process. And this is something that is being currently addressed by multiple teams, so probably it will change for the best in the short term, but this is the foundation ground of how to cover this use case. Now that we have the teleports, the hopes inside of Asset Hub, we can just simply teleport them back to Trappist. And how we do that? With a simple teleport asset call from Palette Assets. Palette XCM. What's the destination? Trappist from the perspective of Asset Hub. Who is the beneficiary? Any address. Which asset do we want to teleport? Hope. But again, Hope in this case is a foreign asset, because again, it was registered, and that is a representation of Hope on Asset Hub itself. Fee asset item, we are going to pay for execution with Hope, and this is the interesting part. You can pay with Hope on Trappist because it is its native asset. And the way limit unlimited, because in this case, it's not that it's not important, but it's not relevant to the use case. This is how it looks. And I will, after this happens, limited teleport assets, you will see, and this is something that really caught my attention, is that you normally, when you do this stuff, you see events that say like foreign asset or teleport or blah, blah, super like easy to understand. In the case of a teleport of your own native asset back to you, it's just a regular balance transfer. So you will see just a regular balance transfer and a confirmation of XCMQ. This is basically what happens like when, yeah, it's the foreign assets are burned on origin because they are being teleported out. These are the hopes being burned. And now on Trappist, we will see that second balance transfer is basically the hopes coming back into Trappist. And now, yes, this is what this is what we did. Simple, straightforward. But basically, we created rock derivative asset on Trappist. We registered that asset, which is a regular asset, on asset registry, so we could map it out to a multi-location, because again, foreign assets on Asset Hub uses multi-locations as ID. Then we use this reserve asset transfer to get the derivatives of rock into the account that we want to send hops from in Trappist. And we get the assets issue event. And then we do the teleport hop, but paying with rock, using withdraw and teleport, right? And then we see the confirmation of foreign asset being issued on destination, which is Asset Hub, and then we are able to teleport hop back to, Trappist. I really hope, and I will like pause it for like, we're okay. Like 15 seconds to process that out, yeah, and try to, yeah, exactly. Process that out and try to, yeah, make a little bit of sense out of this. Yeah, sure.
Would it happen that the final transfer, for example, in this case, is paid
Of course. I mean, in the call, this will be going into, you do check execution at some point, but of course there is nature. This could be done or improved by queries, like by checking these query responses. But currently, the fire and forget. And I know, yes, of course, it's not ideal, but yes.
just understand that the asset basically comes from that amount?
Yeah, exactly. But that is also part of the nature of XCM at some point, right? And many alternatives, there is a deep dive on that. that a partner of us has presented. The last one on XCM has a little workaround there that is interesting to see. Not as on this case, but on the getting a confirmation from that something happened on the other side. Super cool. OK, then that leaves us to the reserve asset transfer. What we are going to do. We are going to do a reserve asset transfer now that we have hop teleported into Asset Hub. We are able to do a reserve asset transfer of hop into another chain without Trappist having even to talk to this other chain. Cool, I guess. I expect to be as excited as I am regarding that, because I really believe that this is super cool. So basically what we're going to do is do a reserve asset transfer of hop into Stout. A Stout, another parachain. What do we need to do? A couple of stuff. First of all, we need to create and register a derivative of hop on Stout. Again, since we're going to do a reserve asset transfer, it's the minting of a derivative, so we need to have a representation of that asset in the destination chain, which is going to be done by creating an asset, create an asset, which I will call Trappist hop, and I will name it ST hop because Stout hop, yeah, works. So yeah, we just created, and one thing that I think it's cool and could be a nice convention is that you registered the derivatives of the native asset of another chain with the same number as their par ID. I think makes sense. Not official, just sending out the proposal, but yeah. Now that you have that done, I will register that, and I do register that on the asset registry. Again, to map out an ID, which is 1836, to a multi-location, right? And what is that multi-location? It's the multi-location of Trappist. And why is that? Because that multi-location of Trappist is what Asset Hub uses as reference to identify hop inside of them. So basically, that is what I'm doing. There is like registering the asset 1836 into 1x1 parachain 1836. This is the multi-location of Trappist. But again, it's also the location, the multi-location that Asset Hub is using as a key to identify their foreign asset created inside of them. Yeah. Asset registry confirmation, which means, okay, I understand now that when I receive an asset with this asset ID, with this multi-location, you are referring to this asset inside of me, which is the 1836. And more configuration to be done. Basically, what we need to do is to accept this would be needed in any case for any kind of a reserve asset transfer. It's not something that is particular to us, so it's really cool to actually cover that ground too. You need to accept the Asset Hub as a reserve, which makes all the sense. And also, you need, this is super interesting for me, that is like, you need to build a trader. And what is a trader? A trader is something that relates the value of an asset to something that I can understand. I am going to receive a reserve asset transfer. Why is that? Because I'm going to receive a reserve asset transfer, and this implies execution of something on me, right? I am Stout. I'm going to receive a reserve asset transfer of hop, right? And I need, and this reserve asset transfer will tell me do something, which is basically mint the derivative of what I have just sent you inside of me. And I'm going to pay you with hop. If I don't implement a trader, when this Asset Hub requests me that, I will say like, I don't know what hop is, so I don't accept that money. I'm so sorry, I won't sell you execution. Sure, shoot.
When do we actually specify that ID of asset from Asset Hub 1836?
Yes.
It's going to be mapped into Stout 1836.
Yes.
We need to define it.
No, not at a configuration level. We use, for that purpose, asset registry. This is a palette that does exactly that mapping that you are saying. Cool. No, we don't want to see this again.
We just say hop as soon as hop, and you swap to execution. Because that way
Yes,
Yeah,
you can set up the
Actually,
trade.
guys, there will be a space for questions afterwards.
Yeah.
But
Sorry.
also, we are slowly reaching towards
It's
the end.
okay,
so-
but yeah, amazing. Yeah, that's the spirit. I will manage to have like a couple minutes to do so because I try to rush it to get in there. So we do this reserve asset transfer, and this is the only small tricky thing to do is like it is a regular reserve transfer asset from asset hub into Stout. Where is what is the destination? Basically Stout from the perspective of Asset Hub, the beneficiary, the address that we want to get that hopes into in Asset Hub, and which assets are we going to reserve transfer? And this is the cool part. We are going to, of course, reserve transfer the hope, which is the whole main story of this. But for the first time, we are going to send a small amount of rock, because underneath the hood, what a reserve asset transfer does is transfer that into a sovereign account of a Parity, of a Parachain. So if in the first transfer we send a small amount of rock that is enough to cover the existential deposit, those assets will be put it into the sovereign account of the Parachain that is the destination, and then basically it will be created. It's super simple. You just do it the first time and then you just forget. And the rest of the time, you just send hops on regular reserve asset transfer. And what is important to understand, going back to the trader, is that when we decide with the fee asset item which asset we are going to pay execution on a Stout, because we set up the trader, we are going to pay execution with hop. And you might have the immediate question of what is the rate of hop. Currently no rate, it's an arbitrary rate because it represents the action, but there's no current market for that. This is the reserve asset transfer, and you will see that basically on the assets that I'm sending this small amount of rock that actually I'm not sending it. It's just to make it happen or to appear on the sovereign account of Stout, and then I am sending the hop underneath of that, which is the asset that indeed I do want to send out. Is it done? No. This is like my huge reference if the video is done or no. It's like, and again 12 seconds. But the cool part is that we will see a reserve asset transfer that says like, okay, you have a reserve asset transfer from a thingy that is like, bam, asset issue, and this one. And this is interesting because the asset that has been issued is the 1836, due to the mapping that you saw. It actually received, exactly, thank you for that question. It's a multi-location, but since we register it on asset registry, it maps immediately to a regular asset inside of me. That is super cool. What did we do? Yeah, we created hop, which is any asset, on a Stout. We register it to map it out, register the hop on on the asset registry palette to do this kind of multi-location mapping into an ID on side of me and the palette asset, and then we just execute this reserve asset transfer, having in count like that. The first time we do need to extract an amount of rock that is enough to cover the existential deposit for the sovereign account of Stout in Asset Hub to be created, and after that you just simply fire away the reserve asset transfers of Hope. And that is the end. I hope that did make any kind of sense.
Thank you for a really interesting talk, Emiliano. Like, I think I have to say it was like really packed with a ton of information. So hopefully we got a lot of questions, and we still got like 5 minutes. So please go on.
Question about the create extrinsic.
Yes.
Would you argue that it might be better to, instead of having to someone manually call it,
Yes.
that it automatically detects the origin and then sees if this multi-location already has an ID in the registry? Don't do anything. If it doesn't, then just create the asset, and then you don't have to guarantee that they manually put that the ID is the par ID and anything.
There is
like
an
that.
interesting case. That is actually a super good question, because there is an interesting case of someone that on testnet actually registered the native asset, but they added a general index after that. That might create some issues. So that kind of securities or checks would be super useful. Again, how did I build this how did we build this with the team from the perspective of a parachain? Like, we cannot touch Asset Hub. we use it. But again, that could be super interesting because I understand you rely on the user putting the right address for that to be registered. Agree.
All right, so in our case, that's a bit more of a practical example. We've been trying to transfer native asset from Asset Hub to a parachain. And when we do that, we get an unroutable error. The question is, what would be potentially the cause for something like that? We got an open channel with Asset Hub, and we just do a limited asset transfer of the native Rococo token to the parachain.
I didn't get the question, sorry. Like if you would look a little bit again.
So we're trying to transfer a native token
Yes.
on from Rococo Asset Hub
Yes.
to a parachain.
Yes.
And when we do the transfer using limited reserve transfer,
Yes.
we get an unroutable error.
Yes.
And the funds are transferred, I think, to something that should be a sovereign account, but it doesn't, they don't appear on the destination chain.
Okay, so you get lost. You're losing the assets on a reserve asset transfer from Asset Hub into your.
Yes.
Yes. Like there is this issue. There are like, for example, first of all, of course, the many possible causes. There not being the reserve accepted or properly configured, like Asset Hub itself. But I do believe that that is one of the first things to cover. There is also this existential deposit thing. Like, if you're like for an account to exist, for a sovereign account to exist on Asset Hub, since the token that Asset Hub uses us for paying this kind of stuff and existential deposit themselves, you need to have a small account of ROC inside of that sovereign account to exist. Otherwise, you would be trying to deposit native assets in an account that doesn't exist and doesn't cover that existential. And the other case is making it sufficient, but that doesn't make sense because otherwise, I think that Asset Hub is not designed for making foreign assets sufficient. That wouldn't make to decide in a level of trust that we want to kind of keep away. Again, not talking from system parachain side, but I think that it makes sense.
I was more of a, because I know usually when you get an error message, I think each of the cases are covered apart from just unroutable is a very abstract definition. What does it mean and what it causes? So.
How I do this whole process is like, some minute with there's Valentin there present, like told me a super cool way to print out the log and read out everything. Of course, you could be debugging if you use the emulator too, but it's like, go through all the lines and try to map out, and then you get into that. Most of the XCM stuff is on, well, now we are in monorepo, but it was on Polkadot, and then just try to map out where this message is coming from and exactly do the debugging. That is what I can recommend, and it's how we basically debug this.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
All right, so one last question. Yeah.
I mean, just to add to your answer to him is that we have also other tools to debug XCM. What I personally do a lot is that we have a repo called XCM Tools where we have like a way to check the human version of an XCM message so you can see how the instructions are built out. And you can also use chopsticks to replay the block and you will get more logs on it as well. But yeah, I mean, there can be many things. I mean, maybe you don't have the trader configured correctly, right, to use the token as a by execution token. So it just depends. There are multiple errors, and every error is super different. And so you need to understand what the error is and what is the cost. And it's not easy. Like, I think the developer experience around this it still has to improve. But the question is a couple things, right? So why would you do this? I mean, I think this just adds a lot of complexity because now you're, instead of doing a trade between one parachain and the other one, you're going through Asset Hub. You need like ROC in this case. So it's like, it's cool, I agree, but it's like adding a lot of complexity to like something that it's a lot easier between one parachain and another one. I guess the only thing you would do it is that if you don't have a channel, right? If you don't have a channel, but that would be the only benefit, right?
Yes and no. And this would be more a question for system parachains than for me. It's true, because they are the masterminds behind Asset Hub itself. It's like, it's unifying functionalities in one place. That would be the simplest, or in which you can actually optimize that into this kind of multi-chain system and view, in which like, okay, let the Asset Hub do whatever they do best, and let's focus and concentrate everything there. But I agree. It does a level of complexity, but there are many other things that are being done. For example, that's in conversion right now that is relevant to have that hope or that native asset in Asset Hub, and from there, things get easier. So at this point, this is where we are now.
I just feel that just the developer experience around this is terrible, because now you have to add into another asset, which is dot or rock, into account, right? So it's like if it's already complicated, and I've been doing XCM for like a year and a half, it's like, wow, now you have to think about an extra like layer of complexity, right?
Yes, but the concept of foreign asset is new, and
No, I agree. I mean, especially because you don't accept it, like you said, as a trader. Like you cannot put like Hub as a trader token, as a token in the trader for Asset Hub, right?
Yeah.
And the other question that I had is like, we in Moomin. Oh. All right. I'll find you. Yeah, or I can find you later. About the trader, right? You mentioned the trader on Stout, and in Moomin we use a trader, and so a lot of the Parachain tokens can trade weight with their token. But we have a problem with like price fluctuations, right? So it's like, it's not the same that we set it up 6 months ago, and now we constantly have to change it, and we don't have like a dynamic price oracle. Do you have any thoughts about that? Like, how can we like teams deal with that?
Not for now. We can do it outside, because I did especially mention that this was an issue. But yeah, it's a more extended question.
Thank you.
Thank you for a quick answer, Emiliano.
Thank you.